just more of an idea to Ireland as well as the young men. And I really believe that the presidential presidency has been able to bring different ideas in this space to actually be able to bring it out.
Committee in Roma. 2014 Mandela Washington Fellow alumni. I do my fellowship in this same place that you're seeing today. The presidential presidency is a blessed to be because it will sharpen the leadership skills, it will sharpen the business acumen, and we can come out that blessed to say.
We can change mentalities, we can change the world, we can start with our country. So it was great to be inspired by what we faced in this nation. One of the things I've learned with the presidential process, I take it back and get the opportunity to
Something that I've got to implement back home in Africa, which is partly the Pan-African Leadership Incubator. We have currently training like 150 aspirants, young people who are looking to vie for political office and preparing them. And this concept was backed and published at the presidential presidency.
We can indeed show visible results of how the presidential presidency has transformed us from who we were before we came to what Africa is finally becoming.
Welcome to the presidential president.
Welcome to the presidential president.
On behalf of the entire arts community at the University of Virginia, I'd like to welcome you to the bicentennial launch celebration. Bravo, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to begin. We ask you to take your seats, turn off your cell phones, and please turn your full attention to the stage. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm UVA President Teresa Sullivan, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this closing session of the Women's Global Leadership Forum. I have the honor to introduce Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, who will introduce our featured speaker. Terry McAuliffe is the 72nd Governor of Virginia. Governor McAuliffe's top priority is building a new Virginia economy. He has conducted 35 trade missions and returned from the most recent one last night at midnight and is still here to be with us. He has been personally delivering Virginia's calling card to business leaders around the globe. As a result, he's brought thousands of jobs and more than $18.7 billion in capital investment to communities across the Commonwealth. This total amount of capital investment is more than any previous governor. He's also implementing major economic development initiatives designed to strengthen the Commonwealth's pro-business climate, ensure efficient investment in world-class infrastructure, and develop a 21st century workforce capable of meeting the needs of emerging businesses and industry. I would also like to say that Governor McAuliffe has been a good friend to the University of Virginia. He is no stranger to these grounds, coming here to learn about our initiatives in areas such as data science and autonomous vehicles, and cheering on the Who's at various athletic events. Governor McAuliffe attended Catholic University and Georgetown Law School, and he is joined today by our First Lady, Dorothy McAuliffe. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Mrs. McAuliffe for being the honorary chair of this forum. In a few minutes, she will moderate the Q&A discussion with this afternoon's featured speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Governor Terry McAuliffe and First Lady Dorothy McAuliffe.
afternoon, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What an honor to be back at UVA. We were just here the other night for the bicentennial, which really was something very, very special. But I want to thank all of you for being here today. I first would like to thank the First Lady of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We just had a... I always like to say I married up. And let me tell you something. Our next First Lady, Pam Northam, Ralph Northam, also married up for you too, Pam. Thank you. Yeah. I don't want to make today overly political, but how about last Tuesday here in the Commonwealth? You know, what happened last Tuesday was an affirmation of 4 great years of creating jobs, making Virginia open and welcoming to everyone, not allowing anyone to divide people, and it really was a turn back of the Trump administration policies that we will not divide people, we will unify people, and it was the Commonwealth of Virginia that sent the message to the country and the world. So I want to thank all of you who did what you did, knocked down the doors. People always ask me every day, Governor, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? It's you. It's the grassroots of our party that makes us the strong folks we are. So give yourselves a great round of applause. But at the end of the day, it's about service and helping people and unifying and bringing people together. We have someone very special with us here today who has joined us here in the Commonwealth of Virginia and here at the University of Virginia. This woman has been an advocate her entire life for women and children. She did it as a young attorney. She did it as the First Lady of Arkansas. She did it as First Lady of the United States of America when she traveled the globe, went to Beijing, told them how they should treat women and other individuals. It was a courageous thing to do. She did it as a United States Senator. And boy, did she do it as a presidential candidate of our party, the Democratic Party of the United States of America. As Secretary of State of the United States, her voice was always heard all over the globe, leaning in. She has been a trailblazer her entire life. She has bulldozed through barriers that they constantly have put up. She's been fighting for women, been an advocate for children. And I'm so honored that she is here with us today. But for many of those people whom she has fought for, I think we ought to listen to a couple of their stories, and let's all look at the video, if you could, of some of the people whose lives were impacted by Hillary Clinton.
Dear Secretary Clinton.
Hello, Secretary Clinton.
Hi, Hillary. Hey, Hillary.
Hi, Hillary.
In 1995, the year I was born, you gave a famous speech in front of the UN in which you said, "Women's rights are human rights." You've been showing girls like me what that means ever since.
Thank you, Hillary, for making it conceivable that someone like me could one day hold the highest office in the land.
For being a bold, fearless female leader.
For showing women and girls everywhere that gender does not have to be a barrier to opportunity.
Thank you, Hillary, for just being real, putting up with bullies, and showing the world what true strength and bravery is.
Thanks for showing me that the only way to truly fail is to fail to try.
For inspiring me to step up in everything I do.
For showing me I don't always have to be sweet. I can be fierce, I can be bold, and I can be in charge.
Thank you for showing that femininity doesn't mean weakness and that strength can be shown in any situation.
Your unwavering resiliency has inspired so many women and girls to recognize those traits of passion, ambition, and strength in each other.
You've made me want to read more, learn more, and be more.
Truly, your intellectual curiosity and grace proves why the future is female.
Because of your leadership, because of you, in the future I will not be afraid to speak up, even when I'm the only woman in the room.
I know my voice matters.
I feel empowered to one day run for political office myself.
And I will dedicate my professional efforts to advancing policy over politics. I will not let fear or intimidation deter me from speaking my mind. Because of you, when I feel underestimated or start to lose hope, I remind myself that I am valuable and powerful.
You've gone farther than any other woman in politics. Thank you for showing us all how to break more glass ceilings.
You taught me how to stay strong and poised through adversity, and when that doesn't work, to just take a hike in the woods.
Thank you for dedicating your life to serving women worldwide.
Because of you, I can. I can. I can.
I can.
I can.
Because of you, I will.
I'm still with you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, a real trailblazer, the first woman partner in her law firm, the first female United States Senator from the great state of New York, the first Lady to have an office in the West Wing, and led the efforts back then for universal health care for all Americans, because everybody is entitled to health care. It is a right. It is not a privilege. Her voice has been out there, a great advocate working with Dorothy on feeding children here in Virginia, and the first woman head of a major political party to get the nomination for President of the United States, and ran a great campaign, and she put 66 million cracks in that glass ceiling for women here in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, our Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Thank you all so much. And I am delighted to be back here, and I think it's terrific that UVA is hosting this leadership forum. I want to thank President Sullivan and everyone who has contributed to the idea that bringing women together globally to talk about leadership is not only worthwhile, but it's really necessary. And I thank my dear friends, your governor and First Lady. Terry and Dorothy have been very close friends to me and my family, and I love their enthusiasm and their commitment to the Commonwealth and the great contributions that they will leave when their term is up. And I join in congratulating Virginia for electing Ralph Northam and others who will continue the kind of progress that Virginia has produced. Now, I am here to say a few words and then to sit down with Dorothy to have a conversation. I wanted to address some of the issues around women's leadership. You may know that I've just published a book called What Happened, which is my best effort to explain the perfect storm that was the 2016 campaign, all the different factors at work, and not just so we could look backwards, but to try to take steps to prevent what happened from happening again, because there were forces at work that are bad for democracy, subversive of our values. You saw some of that with the march in Charlottesville. That was such a repudiation, a rebuke of the values that this country stands for, that this great university stands for. And the people who came to cause havoc, to espouse hatred, were met by so many more who rejected that message,
not only on that day in Charlottesville, but in the days since, believing strongly that hope is more powerful than hate. So when we gather to talk about women's leadership, I want to just say a few words from my own experience and what I wrote in my book in a chapter called On Being a Woman in Politics. Now, leadership is not just in politics. Leadership is also necessary in the private sector, in academia, in the media, in your community life. Everywhere we go in a democracy, we expect people to help lead us. And some of it is capital P politics, and a lot of it is small p politics. People stepping up and volunteering and taking on jobs. People in business looking for ways to make a greater contribution. And so leadership shouldn't just be thought of in the political realm, but I want to focus my short remarks today on just that. So in the chapter that I wrote on being a woman in politics, I tried to explain what it is like to seek office, to put yourself into the arena, to be willing to endure the criticism that comes along with seeking a leadership position. But I wanted to root that in a broader understanding of some of the continuing challenges that women leaders face. You know, the more professionally successful a man is, the more likable he is. The more professionally successful a woman is, not so much. This has been proven over and over again. It still is kind of depressing to think about. But, you know, it kind of struck a chord with me because historically, when I have been serving someone else, whether it was as a first lady in Arkansas or the United States, whether it was serving my clients as a lawyer, whether it was running for and winning a Senate seat to serve the people of New York, or serving in President Obama's cabinet as Secretary of State, I historically had kind of good likability. And when I left the State Department, I had a 69% approval rating. So, you know, of course, that when we women are in service to someone else, we are viewed favorably. And there's been just reams of research about all of this. If you're in a business, for example, and you go advocate that one of your colleagues deserves a raise, people think you are the most generous person ever. But if a man goes and says, I deserve a raise, that's considered appropriate behavior and may very well result in him getting it because it shows that he is sufficiently hard-charging and willing to step up. If a woman goes and says, I deserve a raise, it is looked at unfavorably. I mention these sort of more social characteristics because, of course, they translate into the political arena. I don't know a woman in politics at any level who has not faced the questions and the judgments. You know, one of my favorite previous Americans, Eleanor Roosevelt, famously said that when a woman steps into the arena, she needs to grow skin as thick as the hide of a rhinoceros. And indeed, you have to learn how to take criticism seriously, but not personally. And when you are seeking elected office, and in my case, seeking to do something no woman has ever done, the double standard is excruciating, alive and well, in ways that are almost too numerous to count. So when you speak, you're often criticized for how you speak, for the tone of your speech, for the volume of your speech. I have probably stood on stages at this point in my life with thousands of men giving speeches. And you know, when they get going, they get going. And their voices rise, and their energy builds. Sometimes they even pound the podium. Oh, but if a woman does that. You know, sometimes, occasionally, you know, it's really hard to speak to a crowd that is enthusiastic. I mean, if they're kind of bored, you don't have to really try to engage them. But if they're enthusiastic, you know, it's kind of hard not to join in the enthusiasm. And so a linguist contacted my campaign and said, you know, I think I could really help her to know how to modulate herself in a big crowd. That's great. You know, bring them in. So I said, so can you give me an example of a woman doing what you're advocating? I mean, just name an example or send me a video clip just so I can see it. Never heard from him again. Because, you know, when you are trying to break new grounds or break high ceilings, you're judged against yourself. And I say in my book that the only way we're going to get sexism out of politics is to get more women into politics. And because then maybe it won't be so difficult, because there will be different sizes of women with different hairstyles, may I add? And so it just, all of the criticism and the resentment and the fears will not just be focused on whoever this one woman might be. Now, the other thing you hear when you're in politics is, well, you know, I'm not against women in politics. I vote for a woman, just not that woman. Okay. So after the election, when that woman was not running for anything, all of a sudden I started seeing these same people in the press, in politics, start attacking other women. We saw it during the primary when then candidate Trump attacked the only woman on the stage for the Republican primary, as you all remember, attacked women moderators and interviewers, just a relentless, sexist, misogynistic attack on women, on their looks, on their brains. And he survived. So then when it came to the general election, same thing. You know, all the attacks, the stalking on the stage of the second debate, all of it, you know, all of it meant to diminish women on the public stage. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many women, and particularly young women, were devastated by the outcome of the election, because they knew this wasn't just about me. This was about them. So after the election, all of a sudden, high-profile women on the Democratic side, women who may not, who knows, maybe run for president themselves, all of a sudden, they're under attack. So Elizabeth Warren standing on the floor of the Senate, reading a letter from Coretta Scott King, being told to cease, being told to stop. I was in the Senate for 8 years. I never remember that happening, ever. And then famously continuing to try to read And Mitch McConnell saying, nevertheless, she persisted. My daughter has a really good book by that title, by the way, about women who persist. So all of a sudden, she is driven from the floor of the Senate for reading a letter critical of the nominee for Attorney General. What happens immediately after? One of her male Democratic colleagues, out of a great show of solidarity, goes to his desk, reads the same letter. Nobody tells him to leave the floor. And then, you know, all of the talk, oh, well, you know, she was shrill, she was angry. Kamala Harris, questioning Jeff Sessions. There he is again, questioning Jeff Sessions. And going after him, as well she should. It's her job. Being told by the chair of her committee to cease, to stop. So all of these techniques, these tactics to diminish women, to put us in our place, to prevent us from seeking and obtaining positions of leadership, are still with us today. So part of what we have to do is understand that, and women in particular, regardless of your partisan political stance, need to accept the fact that the diminishment of any woman is a diminishment of you. That you and your daughters and your granddaughters will be constricted, will be in some way limited, because expectations about you will have been shaped. So as I've gone around the country on my book tour, and I've done lots of book signings and book events, I've had many emotional encounters, and particularly with young women, women in their teens, their 20s, who are so determined to become leaders, however they define that. Not everybody has to run for office, but how you become a leader. And what I've tried to do is encourage every one of these young women and all of the young women here today to be willing to take the risks that go along with leadership. Putting yourself out there is scary. You will get criticized no matter how hard you try to avoid it. It does take courage to get up every day and go back out there. One of the great, wonderful outcomes of your elections last Tuesday are all the first-time women who decided to run for office knowing they were walking into the kind of difficult terrain that exists in our politics today. It's also important that for young women in particular, to speak up. In the video, as I was watching it backstage, and one of the young women said that, you know, she's going to speak up even if she's the only woman in the room. I was so happy to hear that, because you have to practice your skills. You have to use your voice. It doesn't just all of a sudden emerge in whatever setting you find yourself. If you've prepared well, if you've thought through what you want to say or what you want to contribute, then don't leave it to chance. Be prepared to speak up. And I was asked the other day, well, what do you do when you're in a meeting and maybe you're the only woman there and you express an idea and nobody pays attention to you? And then, 10 minutes later, a man at the same meeting expresses the same idea. What do you do? Well, look, I think you can say, I am so glad John heard me. and say, now let's work to implement it. Let's make it happen. So in my book, What Happened, I try to cover a lot of the ups and downs of the campaign, but more than that, to kind of take on some of these broader forces. Because what happened in 2016 can, if we're not careful, happen again. And a lot of the underlying factors that were at work are still with us. Russia is still trying to undermine our democracy. And every day that goes by, we learn more about what they did, but I'm equally concerned about what they're doing. This is the first time we've ever been attacked by a foreign adversary and done nothing. And make no mistake, wars used to be fought before the 20th century on land and sea. Then we added the air in the 20th century, and now in the 21st century, it's in cyberspace. And we're not doing a very good job, either in the private or the public sector, understanding the threat that poses to us. Voter suppression is a tactic meant to shrink the electorate, to keep young people, African Americans, the elderly, women, out of voting. Totally contrary to the steady march toward a more perfect union. If you cannot win a fair fight in an election, you don't deserve to win. And you should have to compete against everybody for the votes you get. So some of the problems that I'm concerned about are gender neutral. They are about how we're going to preserve, protect, and defend our democracy. But some of them are very gender specific. And I end the book by talking about returning to my alma mater, Wellesley College, for graduation. We're everywhere. And hearing the graduation speech from the student speaker, who was this just luminous young woman, the daughter of Syrian immigrants who worked as hard as they could to give their daughter the best possible education. She's on her way to medical school, and just standing there talking about what her education meant to her and the challenges that face young women was one of the most moving moments I've had since the election. Because we cannot get discouraged. We cannot give up. We cannot give in to those who would wish to undermine the very foundation of this democracy that we cherish. We and our founders were not perfect. You know that very well here at UVA. But they did something that had never been done before. They put into words ideas of equality and justice that we have been struggling to achieve ever since. But we've made progress, and we cannot let anyone turn us back. So yes, we need women and men. We need people of all ages, regardless of what party you think you belong to, because honestly, the parties are changing. Ask yourself what you believe in, what you value, whose side you want to be on, and recognize that the more our country and the more our leadership represents the great diversity of America, the better, fairer, more dynamic future we will all enjoy. Thank you.
Amen. I feel like I'm just getting in the way. I would have loved for you to stay up there for the next however much longer that we have. But thank you so much for being a part of this amazing Global Women's Leadership Forum. I can't imagine having such an event and not having you, the preeminent leader of our country, here today. And it's a great honor for Terry and for me to have you here, as well as the whole UVA community. As you can tell, this is your room. So we've been talking about, with an amazing panels for the last 2 days, about breaking barriers. Women who have broken barriers, women who are currently breaking barriers, as you say, both locally in their communities, thinking about that higher office, serving in business. What is it, you had some amazing things you said there, but where is it that you find this grit and this resiliency to keep persisting? And by the way, I hope you'll continue. People have asked, some people, not many, why did she write a book? Why do we have to hear a former nominee's never written a book about the election before? And yet I think it has a lot to do with what you just talked about, and I'm grateful for it. So I'd love your thoughts on this particular book topic.
Well, I have to say, I see the book as a book about resilience, both personal resilience and political and national resilience. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was devastated by the outcome of the election. I didn't think I was going to win. I didn't think I didn't think I was going to lose. I didn't think that it would happen. I didn't prepare a concession speech. I was just totally taken off guard. And so I really had to come to grips with that. And so I spent a lot of time, as you probably know, taking walks in the woods and, just being with my family and my friends. We had a great visit with you and Terry at the state capitol. And, I did other things like read mystery novels because the bad guy always gets it in the end. And so it took time. And then I started seeing a lot of the analysis and commentary about the election, and I didn't recognize it. I thought, well, that's not what I thought happened. Or I think they're really missing it because they're not focusing on a particular factor that I thought was important. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, okay, I'm going to try to write a book because I may figure out what I think, and it may be of some use or benefit to my friends and supporters, my voters. And so I just dove into it, and it was very painful at first. I would be writing about something, trying to be as candid as I could be about what I did wrong, what my campaign failed at. But I kept running up against these other factors that were not just unique to me or to my campaign. And in the end, it turned out to be very cathartic. And of course, in the months since, a lot of what I wrote about and warned about has become even clearer to us. So it's not just about personal resilience. I'm a huge believer in admitting that everybody gets knocked down in life, and what matters is whether you get back up. And sometimes you have to get back up more than once. And sometimes it's devastating. Everybody suffers loss. You're not going to lose a presidential campaign, maybe, but you're going to lose a loved one. You're going to lose your health. You're going to lose a job. You're going to lose a love. Something will happen. And I've always thought the differences among the people I've known over my life are those who could somehow incorporate and accommodate that, and then figure out how to pull from the deepest part of themselves the resilience to go on. And I admire people like that. because they often face the most horrific odds. You know, you've got a leadership group of young people from around the world. And as Secretary of State, I visited 112 countries, and I visited people who just put me, you know, out of breath because of their courage and what they stood up to and what they tried to do on behalf of others. So resilience is a big part of the story. And then I think the resilience about what we do in our nation, because look, without being partisan, I think we're facing some very difficult decisions, and we're facing some serious assaults on truth and facts and evidence and reason. You know, there is no such thing as an alternative fact. There just isn't. And so, you know, when a leader tells you something contrary to what you can see with your own eyes, like the size of an inauguration crowd, you know, the first time it happens, you might think, well, that's just weird or whatever. But when it keeps happening, then those of you who study history know that trying to blur the line between fact and fiction is what dictators and authoritarians do. They want you to see the reality they want you to see. And we can't let that happen. So resilience is something that has always been a part of our national character, but I think now, maybe more than ever for a very long time, we're going to have to dig deep and stand up against the kind of assaults on the rule of law and the subversion of democracy and the, you know, coordination with foreign powers and all the stuff that we're now seeing in real time being revealed. And I have a lot of optimism that we'll get through this, but we won't unless people, not just leaders, but citizens, make it clear they're going to stand up and speak out and be part of pushing back.
So you mentioned our elections last Tuesday here in the Commonwealth, and we did increase the number of women in our state legislature by 67%. The bad news was we started at a very low number, but hey, gains are gains, and we're very excited about that. But I have to wonder, personally, I know you were very excited about the election and what it means for the Commonwealth, having followed the Commonwealth so closely in recent years. But how did it feel knowing that your loss, in some ways, truly inspired women to take that leap, to step outside of their comfort zone, whether they had the resources or didn't, but just said, and it was a combination. Yeah. How did you view that night, besides Terry's and my jubilation? And
you know, look, I thought it was you know, about as close to a silver lining as you can get. I think that, as I describe in the book, I mean, the contrast between the inauguration and then the next day, the march, was something that I think began a movement that so many people, and particularly women, want to be part of. So I started an organization called Onward Together, which funds some of these young, dynamic, grassroots organizations that are recruiting candidates, training candidates, helping to fund and direct campaigns for them. So I was thrilled, because that's what it's going to take. And unless we have people actually running for these offices, we can't win. And for the first time, you saw people who really made a stand. They were first-time candidates. They were motivated. They were maybe upset or discouraged and wanting to do something to get over it, whatever their particular reason might be. It was a really good sign. Now we have to keep it up. You know, it is sometimes hard to sustain that level of energy in the face of negativity. You know, when you are, facing the kinds of attacks or criticism or dismissiveness that is too much a part of our politics, you know, it's probably a lot easier just to say, I'm not going to put up with it, I'm not even going to participate. And what we saw on Tuesday was the first marker laid down that people are not going to quit. We're not going to quit on this. We're not going to give up on this. We cannot tolerate what is happening, the kinds of things that are being said and done. So I was thrilled because I don't think in our country, unless we have massive war or a Great Depression, we make huge changes quickly. We are much more, pounding it out step by step, making a difference, holding your ground, keeping going. And I think what happened on Tuesday was a sign of that, and now the people who are elected have to keep faith with those who voted for them.
Well, and I do want to make a point, I don't know if you know, but the turnout on grounds here was historic. I talked to members of the Civic Engagement Task Force, 60% increase, I think, in voter turnout. And going to your point of the importance of civic engagement, the importance of our next generation to not be turned off by the noise. I think that's a real concern. I find it in my own community of friends sometimes to just say, I can't listen, it's too much. So
I see
break
that.
through that?
Well, no, I'm well aware of that because, it was massively depressing and discouraging for a lot of the people who had supported me in the election. And, there's been a lot of writing about how, doctors saw more people reporting anxiety and depression symptoms than they've seen in a long time because it's hard. And you feel like, what's wrong with me? I mean, how can I just pretend like nothing's happened? Well, you don't have to pretend like nothing's happened. You have to embrace what happened and be determined to be part of changing what happened. And that's what I'm encouraged by because, two of the groups that I support, Emerge America and Run for Something, had women candidates running for the first time. And usually, the percentage of first-time candidates that win is about 10%. But in this case, about 50% of first-time candidates won. And here in Virginia, candidates affiliated with both those groups and others that were on the ground kept going and didn't get discouraged. So it's important to have a supportive network of people who kind of don't just vent, but organize in your local community. And there are lots of things to be done. One area that I want to give another shout out to Terry is when Virginia saw, what everybody saw, that our voting machines could be hacked so easily, Virginia decided to move to paper ballots. More states need to do that. Our voting machines are not safe and secure. Maybe we can get new ones that would be, but right now we need a paper trail and we need paper ballots and we need more states to follow Virginia's example.
And very true, as we still have a recount in 3 of our districts ongoing. So we've talked these past 2 days about gender, race, religion, economic barriers of all kinds, barriers to democracy. What can you say about how do we talk to that next generation, even younger perhaps, maybe reinvigorating our commitment to civics and engaging and to each other? When we're going to have to go around, I think, a current bully pulpit that we have. And what are your ideas for how we do that? And how might you be involved in doing that?
Well, I think I'm actually very encouraged by young people, and I'll just talk about Americans, but young Americans are much more inclusive, non-discriminatory, more valuing of diversity, the experience of connecting with people in person and online across all kinds of barriers is something that young people kind of take for granted. So I think that the base is there, but there isn't a lot of formal education, as you say, about civics. And I saw during the campaign a lot of confusion and lack of information about the basic fundamentals of, voting, of governing, of why you can't just decide you want something to happen and make it happen. I mean, there was a lot of questioning. And so there is work to be done, and I think a lot of it has to be done in our schools and certainly our colleges and in our public venues, and that includes online. Because if young people are given the chance to believe that their participation will matter and will affect their futures, we're going to get better results. And I think you saw that in Virginia. You saw a big increase in young voters, and you saw the impact of, two very stark visions, and the kinds of divisive, negative advertising that was, trying to stir people's fears and get them to hate and scapegoat others, versus a much steadier, more predictable vision about what could be done in Virginia. And I think young people roundly rejected the divisiveness and the darkness and the danger that was trying to be marketed. So we just have to pay more attention to this, and part of the reason I'm supporting these other groups is they're all led by young people. They're all led by people in their 20s and their 30s, people who themselves are just passionate about trying to make a difference in their communities. And I want to stress that this doesn't all have to be at the national level or even the state level. There's so much work to be done at the local level, and people who are following what's going on, like the paper ballot issue, can have a big impact if you are involved with an organization. I'm a big fan of Indivisible, because Indivisible did the work of trying to convince Americans going to town halls was important, and then helping to train people about how you go to a town hall and how you interact with a member of Congress and what are the questions you have to ask, and get prepared. So this kind of organizing from the ground up is exactly what we need, and nobody's better at that than young people. And so I hope there will be even more opportunities for us to actually, see greater and greater involvement.
So switch a little bit of gears a little bit. So one theme in your book was that after such a long, amazing life of service and public service and running for office, that at times you felt like you were walking a tightrope without a safety net. Now that you've been on a book tour, you've been very busy, but time is passing, and just wondering if you're feeling like you're seeing that opportunity to not be on that tightrope, and that it might be freeing. And I wonder, is it really freeing to you because of your 40-year commitment to doing the right thing in service to others? Well, it is. As I write in the book, I wanted to pull the curtain back on one of the wildest elections in American history. And I did. I have felt very much as though, I was on a tightrope and had to be careful about what I said and had to keep my guard up. And, those days are gone. And so my view is that I can best help to shape the debate by being right in the middle of it. And it was funny because after the election, obviously I saw the articles. I heard the newscasters saying, "Oh my gosh, why doesn't she just go away?" And if they'd left me alone, I might have gone away, right? I mean, but I got to thinking, I don't remember them ever telling Mitt Romney to go away, or John McCain, or John Kerry, or Al Gore.
I don't remember that happening. And I did get more votes than anybody in American history other than Barack Obama in 2008. So, I really feel such a responsibility for, all the people who believed in me and voted for me, and I thought, well, I'd be kind of letting them down. And the most common thing on this book tour, especially at the book signings, because, I see about 1,000 people in a couple of hours, are people who say, oh, I'm so glad you didn't go away. And I said, well, I really, after thinking about it, didn't have a choice. I'm not going anywhere. And apparently the current occupant of the Oval Office and the press seem to think I am the president, because they are constantly talking, particularly on Fox, about the Clinton administration. And I'm going, what are they talking about? And
don't we wish?
So I'm going to have some fun with it. I'm going to try to fend off harmful things. I was really involved in doing what I could to prevent the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. I do know a little bit about health care, and I know it is complicated. And so, for 7 years, all you heard was repeal and replace, and it's like the dog catching the car. They catch the car, then they all look at each other like, what does that mean? What on earth did that mean, right? So, there were a lot of just surreal moments. Probably one of the most, if you remember the picture of all those elderly, white-haired, white men sitting around a table trying to decide what health care women should get, right? And some of them reportedly saying things like, well, I'm never going to have a baby. Why do I have to pay for maternal health care? I mean, honestly, someone needs to talk to that gentleman. And kind of maybe he's never had the talk, but somebody needs to talk to him. I'm going to keep speaking out. Obviously, I am just totally gobsmacked about their tax bill, which is nothing but a budget-busting, debt-blowing up giveaway to a really small number of people. And as I recall during the campaign, my opponent would repeatedly say, oh, I'm never going to touch Medicare, and I'm never going to touch Medicaid. Well, indeed, based on the last figures I've seen, it changes so quickly it may change again. They would cut about, $600-700 million out of Medicare and about $1 trillion out of Medicaid, further taking away health care from people in order to satisfy their donors. Now, I'm not saying politics is pure, and I'm not saying people don't pay attention to who funds them, which is why it would be really great if we could get to public financing, because it's crazy the way we fund our democracy. However, to blatantly say, as a congressman from Western New York said, well, I got to pass that tax bill, even though it would really hurt a lot of the people who live in his district, and their taxes would go up, and the state and local tax deduction would be gone, even though it would hurt the very people he represents. He said, well, I don't know. He said, I got to do it for my donors, because they said if I don't, I can't call them anymore. Honestly, how do you live with yourself? So I'm going to continue to play a role the best I can in speaking out, particularly about issues that I think are important to the country. I am really concerned about the Children's Health Insurance Program, because I was involved in getting it started back in the 90s on a bipartisan basis, and it hasn't been reauthorized, and 9 million kids get their health care through CHIP. And states are going to have to start cutting back, because the deal was federal government would be funding state efforts to actually help subsidize kids with chronic conditions, congenital, traumatic conditions. So I'm not going anywhere. And, my attitude is, when these guys, and they're all guys basically, when they say, go away, whatever, You know, you don't have to listen to me. I'm not asking you to do that. But I'm not going to, you know, walk away from the debates that I've been involved in my entire adult life. And I'm not going to walk away when our country is at risk of undermining so much of the progress that we have made for people. So that's the way I feel about it.
Thank you. Thank you for not walking away, and we know you won't. Thank you for the Children's Health Insurance Plan. It's about 70,000 children here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that benefit from that plan, and I just can't imagine these guys thinking that children don't demand a right to health care. So internationally, incredible Secretary of State, so many amazing programs, strategy, empowerment of women and girls. If Terry was just at the climate conference with 4 governors who have, you know, joined the U.S. Climate Alliance, where the United States has backed out of the Paris Accord. Mayors were there. I think 15 governors now have signed on. In terms of women and girls empowerment and bringing young men along with them, and thinking of 130 million women, young girls, with no access to education, but all you did. How can we go around and to continue to make sure that we're there for the rest of the world, and we're partners with the rest of the world? And what is your lens as Secretary of State? We have the former president of Kosovo here, who is worried about her country and the lack of leadership in the United States.
Well, I'm very happy to see my friend, the former president of Kosovo, who I had the privilege of working with. I think we are sacrificing our competitive advantage under this administration. And we're sacrificing it across the board. We're clearly sacrificing the moral high ground, the values debate that we have always represented, arguing for human rights, standing up to dictators and taking on some of the worst problems in the world to try to help resolve conflict and deal with human rights abuses. But even if you were to make the argument that that's not critical to our future, you're missing the big picture, because we are sacrificing our lead in key areas that will be absolutely essential to the economy going forward, and you mentioned one. Right now, with the decision by Syria to join the Paris Agreement, we are the only country not included. And it is nothing but a giveaway to fossil fuel interests by the current administration, who seem not to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, because the clear imperative under Paris was not to immediately shut every fossil fuel production facility or generation facility down, but to work diligently to get to as close a endpoint as you possibly could by increasing clean renewable energy and doing your utmost best to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, other countries, most notably China, are going full speed ahead, because they're not shutting their coal plants yet, but they are ramping up their solar and their wind operations, because they want to be the world's major exporter. They want to dominate that market. They take technology we created and pioneered and are basically going into, you know, reverse engineering and creating new models. So even if you don't care about climate change, even if you don't look at the pictures of people literally choking on poisonous gases in New Delhi, or walking around Beijing with masks on, even if you don't pay attention to that or think, oh, that's their problem, not ours, even though we are a global ecosystem, why would we give up that economic advantage? It makes no sense. So you can go issue by issue, and you can see the United States ceding leadership, economic leadership, strategic leadership, moral leadership. And certainly when it comes to women and girls, you know, we started when I was secretary the first ever office for the Global Women's Ambassador. And we did it not just because, you know, I think it's a nice thing to do. We did it because the evidence is compelling that supporting women's rights and opportunities is good for democracy. It's good for the United States. It creates consumers, again, if all you're interested in is the economy. It creates more opportunities to deal with and end conflicts. You can go down a long list. So this administration is totally uninterested. What's happening in the State Department is tragic. Shutting the State Department down, sort of office by office by office. Offering buyouts of $25,000 to people who have deep language and cultural and historical expertise is foolish. And so there's so much going on that is damaging the the infrastructure of our government and damaging our standing overseas, that it is giving a big advantage to countries that don't share our values, countries with whom we are adversarial. So I think it's the women and girls piece is a part of the larger picture. And I'm very, I'm very worried. And I can only say that having, negotiated with, met with a lot of the leaders who are still there, because they are self-perpetuating, there is no doubt in my mind that they feel they've been given a lot of room to run. And they believe that they are playing our current administration. And they're thrilled by it, because the more we do to damage ourselves, the better off they will be. And if we don't take seriously our economic challenges and our strategic challenges, including upping our game on cyber offense and defense, we're going to be left crippled. And we will pay a price. For a long time, early on when I was talking about the Russians and nobody was listening to me, and we started doing it during the campaign, and people were like, oh yeah, right, the Russians. It was so unprecedented that it was really difficult for the press to even grasp. So now we know a lot more than we used to know, and we obviously can see that the Russians, this didn't just happen overnight. It didn't just happen because Putin disliked and feared me. It happened because he was aiming at undermining democracy. And, the former president of Kosovo knows this is what they do. They are good at it. And, if we're on our game, we're good at it too. But if we don't even play, or we throw in our towel, or we basically deny it, it could not be more dangerous, because they will continue to sow discord among Americans. And if you look, they used Facebook, they used Google, they used Twitter, they used Instagram, they even used Pinterest. I don't know exactly how, but they did. They used Pinterest to post and write divisive messages to set Americans against each other. They were involved in promoting and amplifying the message in Charlottesville out of the white supremacists. A lot of these white supremacists admire Putin. They think of him as kind of the macho icon of white supremacy. And he knows that. I mean, he is no fool. But he's a former KGB colonel, and he understands how to play the influence game. And when our president basically says, well, he told me he didn't do it, and, I believe him, it is so beyond weird that you don't even know what to say. But it cries out for serious investigation. And I want to do a shout out to your two senators, you know, my wonderful running mate Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, who's done a great job on this.
And to that, you know, we have leadership or not at the federal level. We have, but then we have. You saw the testimony and the response when our social media giants were brought in to Congress, and I just wonder, what did you think of the response there? Because I do think we have to say there's responsibility across the landscape here.
Well, I think we're just at the beginning of understanding exactly what happened with the technology companies. You know, initially they just denied everything. I remember one of the first responses was Facebook saying that, oh, they found 450 sites and they shut them down. And then like a week or two later, it came out that they shut 50,000 sites in France during the French election. So, you know, none of it made sense. So the tech companies, I think, were not aware of how they were being used at first. I mean, after a while, if you're getting paid in rubles, I think you should probably figure it out. But, you know, there were some sort of benchmarks along the way. So now every day that goes by, we learn more. And just yesterday, you know, Theresa May, the Prime Minister in the UK, called out the tech companies and called out Russia for what is now emerging as their influence campaign to get Brits to vote to get out of the EU, the Brexit vote. Now, Putin's strategy is to break up the EU, break up NATO, undermine democracy, demonstrate that authoritarian, strong male leaders are the better way to go. And he makes no, you know, he makes no apologies for it. This is what he's always believed. But we cannot be complicit, and that includes our government, and that includes our private sector, and in particular, our tech companies. Because if we are complicit in our own subversion, shame on us. I mean, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on us, right? And now we know how they're using it. And some of it is so obvious. I think there was some reporting, Terry, that, you know, here in Virginia, the Russian bots were out in, you know, in full force, you know, a couple of days before the election. You know, all of these, you know, weirdly worded tweets, you know, with things like putting the $ behind the number instead of in front of it, or odd syntax, which is very much somebody trying to convey a thought in English for whom it's not a natural language. So we can see this now, and we have to pay attention. And, you know, the tech companies, when they were under pressure to get rid of child pornography, did a pretty good job. So now they've got to protect our democracy against foreign intervention. If we want to argue with each other, all bets are off. You know what? I'm on Twitter. Somebody goes after me, fine. You know, that's their right. But if they don't disclose, they're not identified, they're paying to promote a fabrication, people need to know that. And then, you know, people have to make up their own minds whether it's important to you or not. So I think we're only at the beginning of trying to figure out what the responsibility of the tech companies should be. And, you know, Senator Warner and a few of his colleagues are really, you know, on top of that. And I don't know if they can get anything passed, but I will say this, and Republicans better understand this. Putin is no long-lasting friend. If he thinks he can make some kind of advance by going after Republicans, he will. And when the Congress passed tough sanctions on Russia because of what we were learning about their interference in our election, and I will say they affected the outcome.
You know, people say, well, they may have interfered, but they didn't affect the outcome. What do you think advertising is for? It's to affect how you think, and in elections, how you vote. And so they affected the outcome, and we saw, you know, the impact of that and the ongoing impact of it, but it is by no means clear yet everything they did. And the tech companies have to help us figure that out, because, you know, when the sanctions were passed, Trump didn't want to sign them. He was forced to sign them, but he's never implemented them. And I would bet, if I were a betting person, that was raised in his conversation with Putin. Because Putin is certainly grateful for that, because what does Putin care most about? He cares most about getting access to his money and the money of the oligarchs around him. They have amassed unbelievable fortunes. We have some hints to it because of some of the disclosures that have come in the Panama Papers and this latest, you know, drop of papers. They own real estate, they've laundered money, they have huge financial stakes outside of Russia. So sanctions can be effective. And that's why, you know, he doesn't want the sanctions enforced, and why part of his dealings, as we're now understanding with representatives of the Trump campaign, was to get the existing sanctions lifted. So the tech companies have got to decide whose side they're on. And they are thriving companies because they're American companies. It was the American economy, the American entrepreneurial spirit that gave them the opportunity for, you know, a Russian kid to help start Google, for people to leave their countries and come to Silicon Valley to be part of the tech revolution. That could not and did not happen anywhere else. And they'd better stand up and speak out and take action to protect our democracy.
Well, our time is up. I'm very sorry to say, because I could do this all afternoon, and I think I speak for the audience. But I also speak for the audience, I do believe, when I say thank you for continuing to speak up. You could be playing with Aiden and Charlotte right now and have your foot up on a stool, but that's not you. And we're very grateful for being here and for all your contributions, and we're looking forward to the future. All right.
Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats while the stage party exits the building.